Hi, I'm Sarah. My parents left me a note, 7 words that ended everything. She's the real daughter. Stop calling us. No warning, no conversation, just silence and a locked family group chat. But that wasn't the first cut. They'd already deleted me from childhood photos, told the world I never existed, gave my name to someone else, and I stayed quiet until I found the will. They crossed out my name like it was a typo. But what kind of family does that? Rewrite your life while you're still alive. And if your mother calls you a placeholder, were you ever really her child? I had driven that road hundreds of times. 2 hours from Portland to Ashland, winding down the same tree-lined highway, past the same aging barns and billboards that once promised things we never needed. But that Saturday, something in me hesitated, an itch I couldn't scratch. Maybe it was the silence. Mom usually texted by now, reminding me to bring the gluten-free cake samples she wanted for the family reunion. But nothing. I'd called once late last night. No reply. Still, I convinced myself they were just busy. With Dad recently retired and the reunion looming, there was always something happening at the Monroe house. I'd spent years managing expectations, mine and theirs, and had learned to swallow discomfort like bad coffee. So I packed the folder of caterer invoices and sample menus, slid into my car, and told myself everything was fine. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew it wasn't. No music from the kitchen. No clinking china from Mom's morning tea. Not even the dog barking, a dog that never missed a car door. The house looked perfectly still, undisturbed, like it hadn't been lived in all week. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the side door out of habit. The key turned easily. The air inside was stale, like no windows had been opened. My sneakers squeaked softly against the polished wood floors. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. On the island, right where Mom used to leave Post-its, reminders for groceries or whose birthday card to mail, was a single sheet of paper, folded once, plain white. My name wasn't on it. No envelope, no warning. I opened it with trembling fingers. She's the real daughter. Stop calling us. That was it. 7 words. No salutation, no signature, no punctuation, just finality. I stood there, not blinking. My body didn't know what to do. There was no scream, no tears, just the deafening silence of realization. The handwriting wasn't hers. It wasn't the looping cursive she used for recipes and anniversary notes. This was sharp, pressed. The kind of writing you only use when you mean something. They say silence speaks volumes. But this was a scream with no sound. I didn't rush. I didn't fall apart. I picked up the note, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my bag. Then I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my mother. Understood. That's all I wrote. 1 word. No question marks. No rage. I turned, walked back out through the same door I came in. The car felt colder than it had when I left it. I drove without music, without podcasts, without thinking. Just empty roads and a mind full of walls closing in. Every streetlight passed felt unfamiliar. Every turn oddly sharp, like the city itself had shifted. At a red light, I remembered a quote from Maya Angelou. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I hadn't. Not the first time Mom said I was too intense. Not when Dad suggested I take a back seat so Valmai could shine. Not when they skipped my graduation brunch because of flights and timing. I had believed in what I wanted them to be, not who they were. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt less shocked, but more hollow. I walked in, dropped my keys, sat on the couch, and took out my phone again. I tried calling my mom. Blocked. I tried Dad. Blocked. My heart didn't race. It stopped. I opened the group thread for the reunion planning. Recipient not found. They hadn't just rejected me. They erased me. I tried calling the landline at the house. 1 ring, 2. No answer. No voicemail. Then something in me shifted. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe just the final straw cracking under a decade of pressure. I stood up, opened my laptop, and went to work. I began pulling old emails, screenshots, invitations I sent. Proof that I had been involved, had contributed, had existed, my digital footprint in a house that now pretended I never walked its halls. This wasn't grief, it was strategy. This would not be ignored. Not again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, lit only by my laptop screen. The note sat beside me on the coffee table, folded once, the words burning through the paper. I refreshed my inbox. New email. Subject line, "You've been removed from Family Legacy Shared Drive." I stared at the screen, jaw locked. My cursor hovered over the trash icon. I didn't click it. I looked down at the note again. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. I didn't argue. Pause. But I wasn't done either. The morning after the note, I woke up to a kind of silence that didn't feel like rest. Not the peace you hope for when you sleep, but the kind that comes after something has been taken away. Quiet, flat, almost too clean. I got out of bed, still in the clothes I'd driven home in, and walked into the kitchen like my body needed something to do. Coffee. It's always the coffee. I reached for the pot, filled it, turned it on. As it brewed, I grabbed my phone, more out of habit than curiosity. But instinctively, I opened Instagram. And there it was. A new post from Aunt Deborah. It was a wide group shot, taken at some winery I didn't recognize. Tall glasses, summer hats, polished smiles. And right there in the middle, my mom and Val Mai, arm in arm. Dad off to the side with a cigar, like he always did after 2 glasses of red. The caption read, "So grateful to be with our full family again this weekend."
Gently.
Our full family. There wasn't a single mention of me.
No
No tag. No spot left open, not even a hint that I'd once belonged in that frame. I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. It wasn't just forgetting. It was deliberate. It was clean. I took a screenshot, then another, just in case. I scrolled through the rest of Aunt Deborah's page and found 3 more photos. Close-ups, different angles, toasts raised, desserts cut. They looked so happy. So choreographed. I thought to myself, being unwanted is one thing, but being unacknowledged, that's a kind of death they don't write obituaries for. I put the phone down, and then it buzzed. A reminder popped up. Val Mai's birthday. Of course. I opened Facebook, again, out of muscle memory. The first post at the top was from Mom. "Happy birthday to our one and only daughter. You are our heart, our light, our everything." It was the one and only that did it. I didn't blink. I didn't even react. Not right away. My thumb scrolled down to the comments. Val Mai had already replied. "Love you both. So lucky to be your girl. Their heart." Last year on my birthday, they'd forgotten to call. When I mentioned it days later, Mom said, "You know how busy things get. Besides, birthdays aren't everything." But this post wasn't an accident. It was scripted, intentional, sharp, like the note on the counter. I took another screenshot. Then I opened a blank document on my laptop. At the top, I wrote, "Signs I was already gone." I listed them in order. No seat at the Thanksgiving table until I asked, my name missing from the family retreat itinerary. Wedding plans, adjusted, so Val Mai could use my florist. That time, Uncle Mitch introduced me as Val Mai's cousin. I hadn't wanted to see it then. I gave them the benefit of the doubt so many times I could have written a manual on it. There was a phrase an old coworker once said during a late-night office chat, something that stuck. If they wanted you there, you'd know. Silence is an RSVP. I added it to the document. My grief had started to harden. Not into anger, but into something sharper. Cleaner. Like glass that had broken but now caught the light in a way you couldn't ignore. I opened Excel and created a spreadsheet. Dates, events, posts, language used, exclusions noted. I wasn't collecting evidence for them. I was doing it for me, for the version of myself that needed to know she hadn't imagined all of it. By late afternoon, I was drained. I sat back, rubbing my temple, staring at the glow of the screen. Then I clicked over to my social media, unfollowed. By 3 cousins, 1 aunt, 2 family friends, no messages, just silence. I exhaled slowly, then went into my settings, locked everything down, privacy on, story views hidden. I started removing mutuals, one by one. Not out of spite, but protection. There was nothing left to see. Not for them. Next, I opened a new folder on my Google Drive. I named it, "They Erased Me," but not from me. And in that folder, I began adding it all. The note, the screenshots, the spreadsheet, the timeline. If they were writing me out of the story, I was writing my own version, line by line. I pulled out a list I kept in my desk drawer, not a diary, not exactly, just a place where I jotted down things I might need someday. On it were my original birth certificate scans, archived emails with financial records, even the scanned wedding invoice I'd paid for and never been reimbursed. I digitized them all and dropped them into the folder. I sat back and looked around the apartment. It was quiet, but this time it felt different, less hollow, more deliberate. My eyes landed on a photo hanging near the bookshelf. It was from 5 years ago, a family barbecue. I was standing next to Dad, mid-laugh. Mom and Valmai were on the other side of the grill. I stood, walked over, and gently lifted the frame from the wall, carried it to the storage closet, and set it in a box marked MISC. I didn't slam it shut, just lowered the lid, slowly, carefully. Just as I closed my laptop, a new push notification buzzed on my phone. "You've been removed from Monroe Legacy Chat." Not muted, not archived, removed. I didn't plan to check Facebook that morning. I didn't plan for anything, really. It had been 3 days since the note, 2 since the group chat removed me, and I was beginning to understand what erasure felt like, not as an event, but as a slow unraveling. Like your life being edited in real time, frame by frame, while you're still living in it. The notification came from a distant cousin I barely spoke to. I was tagged in a post from her Throwback Thursday album. Curious, and against my better judgment, I clicked. The image loaded slowly on my screen. Our backyard, plastic streamers hanging from the trees, folding chairs, paper crowns. It was my 6th birthday. I remembered the butterfly cake, the pink ribbon tied tightly in my hair, the gap where I'd just lost a front tooth. I remembered that day because Dad had called me his brave girl after I cried during the balloon pop game. But the caption didn't say that. It read, "Callista's 6th birthday, always our star since day one." My fingers gripped the phone tighter, not out of surprise, but recognition. That wasn't a simple mistake. That wasn't a misremembered year or mislabeled album. That was intentional. A quiet overwrite. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, eyes scanning every face. There I was, me, not her. My dress, my gap-toothed smile, my tiny hands holding the cake knife. But in this version of the story, I didn't exist. "This isn't a mislabel," I whispered, more to myself than the room. "It's a rebranding." I took a screenshot, then another of the caption. I hovered over my cousin's profile and clicked unfollow. I didn't need more ghosts posing as memories. The knot in my stomach told me what came next. I grabbed my keys. The drive to Ashland was quiet. I didn't even turn on music this time. The last time I'd driven there, I walked into silence and left with a single sheet of paper that fractured everything. This time, I wasn't going into the house. I was heading to the old side shed. Our family kept boxes there, yearbooks, report cards, Christmas ornaments too faded for display, but too sentimental to toss. I hadn't been inside that shed since before I moved out. My name used to be scribbled on a few of those boxes. The front door of the house was locked, but the side shed wasn't. The latch clicked open easily. Inside, it smelled like old wood and dust. The light switch didn't work, so I used my phone flashlight. There it was, tucked in the corner under a dusty tarp. A box labeled Sarah, old school stuff. My name written in Dad's handwriting. I peeled back the lid. Empty envelopes, a broken snow globe from 5th grade, 2 crumpled spelling bee ribbons. That was it. My shoebox time capsule, the one I made with Dad when I was 8, was missing. The one with the seashell from our trip to Cannon Beach. Gone. I looked around and spotted another box, this one larger, newer looking, cleaner. Callista, awards, photos, drawings. I pulled back the flaps. Photos, trophies, a full scrapbook. Childhood memories preserved like museum pieces. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the rim of the box, trying to understand the sharp twist in my chest. This wasn't just preference. It was erasure by curation. I didn't disappear, I muttered. I was cleared. On the drive back to Portland, I thought about the shoebox. I hadn't remembered it in years. But suddenly, I could feel the stickers I'd used to decorate it, the way I'd carefully folded my letter to my future self. Back home, I messaged Quinn. He was the only person from our circle I still trusted. He used to help digitize the family's home videos when he worked for a local editing service. If anyone had my piano recital, it would be him. "Hey, random question," I typed. "Do you remember if you ever had a copy of my recital tape? The one at the Methodist church? I was maybe 10? He responded within a minute. "Hey, I only got Valmai's stuff. Your parents said yours weren't necessary. Said they'd already backed yours up. Sorry." Not necessary. I opened our family's shared cloud. The folder labeled Family Tapes was still there. But the subfolder with my name? Gone. I searched again. Different spellings. Nothing. I sat at my desk, the glow of the screen reflecting off my glasses, and thought, if I vanished tomorrow, would they even remember my voice? I opened my Erased Me folder. It was growing. Added, screenshot of the mislabeled photo caption copy, list of missing items from the shed, Quinn's message. Then I hit record on a voice note and spoke softly into the mic. They're not just removing me from the present, they're rewriting the past. I opened a timeline spreadsheet, labeled columns, date, event, evidence, level of deletion. I started filling in rows. The more I typed, the clearer it became. This wasn't a single fracture in a relationship. It was a strategy, a cleanup effort. When I reached for my mug, the notification pinged. New email, subject, legal transfer of Monroe heirlooms, confirmation, sender, Monroe family attorney, recipients, Vespra Monroe, Valmai Monroe. I wasn't CC'd. I didn't need to open the attachment to know what it said. The envelope was thin, barely thicker than a flyer, and labeled Personal Records. It came in the mail that Tuesday afternoon, dropped off by the building manager who shrugged and said, "Looks official." I didn't recognize the sender, but the return address was tied to my health insurance. I assumed it was another annual notice or a policy update I didn't ask for. Still, I sliced it open with the corner of my nail. Inside was a copy of my birth certificate. I blinked. That wasn't something I requested. The document looked standard at first glance. My name, the hospital in Eugene, the date and time I'd seen a dozen times before on my driver's license. But when I got to the mother line, everything stopped. It didn't say Vespra Monroe. Instead, a name I had never heard before stared back at me. Cold, typed, certified. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't change. My body seemed to know that panic wouldn't help. But my mind began unraveling the edges of every memory like someone pulling thread from a sleeve. A flash of an old moment hit me, sitting alone in the waiting room of Dr. Allen's office when I was maybe 7. Valmai was inside with Mom. The nurse had offered me apple juice, and when I asked why I couldn't come in, she just smiled and said, "You're a guest today, sweetheart." A guest? I hadn't thought of that day in 20 years. Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It peels you back, one detail at a time. It makes you question what parts were real and what parts were just good acting. Later that evening, while forwarding a receipt for an insurance copay, I opened my email. A new subject line caught my eye. Confirmation of legal status update, Monroe Estate. My cursor hovered, then clicked. The body of the message was short, formal, unapologetic. This is to confirm that as of 2021, Ms. Alethea Monroe is no longer recognized as a legal heir or family representative per updated documentation filed and reviewed by Monroe Estate Council. This update is reflected in all estate, legacy, and asset records moving forward. No greeting, no explanation, no regret to inform, just sterile disownment delivered electronically. I sat back in my chair. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. This wasn't about a missed call or a forgotten birthday. This was a paper trail they had orchestrated, quietly, efficiently, and legally. I downloaded the message as a PDF, saved it to my hard drive, and filed it under my growing digital evidence folder titled Proof of Removal. I labeled it simply, Legal proof of disownment. The room felt still, but my brain was loud. I pulled out the journal I'd kept since college. Tucked between old to-do lists and half-baked resolutions were entries, little things I had written that made sense now. From 2013, Mom said I was her emotional adoption because I didn't match her vibe. Then she laughed, but I didn't. From 2016, asked for baby photos for a school presentation. She said they got lost in the move, but I found one of Valmai the same year. I placed the birth certificate beside those pages. The paper didn't scream or accuse, but it clarified everything. They weren't confused about who I was. I was the only one who didn't know. It wasn't one act of betrayal. It was a sequence, a timeline of separation so methodical it bordered on cruel. I opened a blank Word document, title, Timeline of Deletion. First entry, 2021. Legal heir status removed without my knowledge. Second, 2022. Digital family cloud access revoked. Third, 2023. Exclusion from reunion planning, estate transfers, public birthday acknowledgement removed. I didn't stop at 3. I included every small omission, the photo mislabels, the missing time capsule, the erased folder from the family archive, the birthday card never sent. By the time the sun began to set, casting golden strips across my kitchen floor, I had built the blueprint of my erasure. But if they could craft a silent exit, I could write a louder return. I cleared the dishes off the dining table and laid out a notepad. On it, I scribbled action items, both emotional and legal. Retrieve Social Security documents, request original hospital discharge files, review last shared tax filing, secure digital backups, contact a state attorney. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't going to become the storm they feared. I was going to become the record they couldn't rewrite. On my fridge, I placed a sticky note. They tried to erase me quietly, so I will respond loudly, with truth. I opened my laptop and searched my old contacts list for Deirdre, an attorney I knew from an old nonprofit board. She specialized in estate disputes. I dialed her number and left a voicemail. Hi, Deirdre. This is Sarah Monroe. I think we might need to talk. It's about family. I ended the call, pushed my chair back, walked toward my bookshelf where a few frames still sat like relics I hadn't found the strength to bury. One was a picture from high school graduation, Valmai and Mom standing proudly, arms linked. I was off to the side, cropped partially by the edge of the frame. I took it down, not in anger, in clarity. Back at my laptop, I opened my email to check for Deirdre's reply. Instead, a new message had just arrived. Subject: Access revoked. Monroe Family Trust shared account. The screen pulsed faintly. My name wasn't even in the body of the email. Just a log entry, quiet, efficient, and final. 3 days after the lawyer's email, I parked outside the county courthouse. I'd called ahead, but they told me estate records had to be reviewed in person. Something about legal protection. I brought my ID, some old documents, and a calmness that felt unnatural. The clerk behind the counter was maybe in her 50s, hair in a tight bun, readers perched at the edge of her nose. "You're looking for estate filings under what name again?" she asked without looking up. "Monroe. I'm Sarah Monroe." I slid my license across the counter. She typed, scanned, then paused, subtle but long enough to confirm my instincts were right. She murmured, lips pressing together. "You're not listed as a beneficiary." I leaned in. I was. She tilted her screen away. "It shows Valmai Monroe as the sole heir and representative. The update was filed last year. I can print the summary for you." I nodded. When she handed me the page, it was as dry and direct as the email had been. My name didn't appear once. The property that used to be co-owned between my father and me, land I had helped maintain, taxes I had split, was now solely in Valmai's name. I didn't lose my place. They stole it and pretended I was never there. I folded the paper, thanked the clerk, and walked out without breaking stride. Later that week, I showed up at a local brunch hosted by the nonprofit I'd supported for over a decade. It wasn't about appearances. I'd been on the founding committee. My name had been on plaques, programs, event posters. But lately, it felt like I'd been slowly peeled away from it all. I took my seat at a round table near the window, I didn't expect warm welcomes, and I didn't get them, just polite nods and forced smiles. An older woman at the table leaned toward Valmai, who'd arrived fashionably late in her usual white coat and gleaming smile. "She's remarkable," the woman whispered, unaware I could hear. "She really is the backbone of the Monroe legacy." I stirred my coffee slower than needed. Moments later, a younger man at our table leaned toward me. "Are you Valmai's cousin?" he asked casually. I looked him in the eye. "I'm her sister." A pause. His eyebrows rose. "Oh," he said. "Sorry, I thought you were staff." I forced a half smile, nodded once, then turned back to my cup. I had been the helper for as long as I could remember. During family dinners, I was the one clearing plates while Valmai posed for pictures. When I offered ideas, they were too intense. When I stayed quiet, I was withdrawn. That brunch table felt like every Thanksgiving, every wedding prep, every fundraiser meeting I'd ever sat through. Except this time, I wasn't swallowing it. When my name was called to say a few words, originally to thank donors, I stood up, straightened my spine, and walked to the podium without notes. I looked out across the room and felt my chest tighten. I let the silence linger. "There's power," I began, "in having your name remembered, especially when the world tries to forget it." The room hushed. "I was supposed to speak today about funding transparency," I continued, "but that's not what this moment needs. This moment needs honesty. I didn't name anyone. I didn't have to. For some of us, our names were only ever whispered behind closed doors, our stories edited, our photos repurposed, our voices softened to make room for someone else's louder version." A man near the back shifted in his chair. "But we are not placeholders. We are not footnotes in someone else's chapter." Someone across the room clapped once, then stopped. A few murmurs. One woman wiped the corner of her eye. "If they won't say my name, I'll say it louder. And better." I stepped down before applause could gather, returned to my seat, finished my now cold coffee. After the brunch, I walked 3 blocks to my car, but instead of heading home, I stopped at a nearby cafe, pulled out my laptop, and made 2 changes. First, I updated my LinkedIn, removing all references to the Monroe legacy. Second, I emailed my attorney and revised my own estate plan. No Monroe family member would benefit from anything tied to my name again. Then I opened a new document, titled, "On Being Erased, A Daughter's Reclamation." I wrote the first paragraph and submitted it anonymously to a national blog I follow, one for estranged adult children. Back home, I stood in front of the painting in my hallway. It was a landscape my mother gave me years ago, meant to match the couch. I took it down, carried it to the storage closet, and closed the door. In its place, I hung a framed quote I had ordered that week. "They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed." That night, as I was brushing my teeth, a new notification flashed on my phone. "Family event, Monroe Annual Celebration, RSVP, now." I tapped the invite. Valmai was the listed host. Scroll down. Guest list. My name wasn't there. Courtney's message came at 9:12 a.m., just as I was pouring coffee into the same chipped mug I always used on Mondays. It vibrated through the counter before I even picked up the phone. "Thought you should see this," she wrote. No context, just a screenshot. At first, it looked like a typical group text header, an iMessage bubble with multiple initials. But the title of the thread stopped me cold. Real Monroe Legacy. There were names I recognized: Valmai, Vespera, the family lawyer, Richard, a few cousins I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The preview lines were short, businesslike, bullet points about upcoming foundation events, a line about property distribution, then one message, bolded by my screen's emphasis setting. Once Sarah's removed cleanly, everything aligns. Valmai wrote that, with a casual authority I didn't recognize. Vespera's reply was a simple thumbs up. My stomach didn't flip, it froze. There I was, not forgotten, but deliberately removed. Not even a participant in the conversation, just a task they were ticking off. I sat down at my desk and opened a new folder in my cloud. Named it Evidence, Strategic Removal. Every message Courtney forwarded went in. Every timestamp. Every participant name. I didn't rush. I filed them like receipts. I didn't shake. I focused. Because now I understood. This wasn't grief. This was logistics. They weren't mourning me. They were managing my absence. Around 11:30, I grabbed my keys and drove downtown. The bank branch near my old office had better staff than the one by my apartment, and I needed someone who wouldn't look at me like I was dramatic. The joint account still existed, an old one we used for shared property taxes, maintenance on the family cabin, and the odd reunion invoice. I'd almost forgotten it still had my name attached, but they hadn't. Inside, a young teller directed me to a private desk. I explained the situation, showed my ID, and said I wanted to review the account access. "Looks like you're still a co-owner," he said, scanning his monitor. "Balance is 89,120. A withdrawal is pending for Friday." "What's the transaction labeled as?" I asked. "Monroe Legacy Gala, venue and catering." Of course, the celebration I wasn't invited to. The celebration they were funding, with money from an account with my name on it. I leaned in slightly. "I'd like to place an emergency freeze on the account. Legal ownership dispute." The teller blinked. "You can do that?" I nodded. "I have standing, and I can provide documentation if needed." He excused himself, came back 5 minutes later with a manager, and confirmed they could freeze all withdrawals until further review. I signed the form, took a copy, and left. Outside, I inhaled differently. Not deeper, but cleaner, like clearing dust out of a room you've let sit too long. I didn't need to burn their house down, I just needed to close the gate. That night, the fallout began. Texts from numbers I hadn't seen in weeks started pinging through. Some were half accusations, others cloaked in concern. "Why would you do that to us?" "You've made this harder than it needs to be." From Valmai. "You're being petty. Just walk away with dignity." Dignity? I stared at the word. What exactly did they think I'd been doing all these years? I had stayed quiet while my name was replaced on documents, while my photos were switched out, while my history was sliced and stitched to flatter them. Dignity died the day they erased me from a photo I lived through. I didn't reply. I screenshot every message, filed them into a new folder labeled Post-Freeze Fallout. Then I opened my calendar and scheduled a legal consult for the end of the week. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was documenting an architecture of removal. By 8:30 p.m., I was finishing dishes when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "This is Sarah," I said. A man's voice responded, calm but careful. "Ms. Monroe, I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Richard Bellamy. I'm his assistant." The lawyer. "There's some concern about your recent action regarding the joint account." "Concern?" I repeated, setting the dish towel down. "That's a polite way of putting it. Well, there's been confusion around access. We were hoping for clarification." "You have it," I said. "I'm a legal co-owner. That's documented. I acted within my rights." Silence. "Understood," he replied after a beat. I didn't offer more. I ended the call. Looked at the framed quote on my wall, bold serif on cream cardstock, hung right above my desk. "They tried to bury me." I whispered the rest. They didn't know I was a seed. I was just sitting back down when another message from Courtney came through. Another screenshot. Another line from the group chat. This time, Valmai wasn't hiding behind strategy. She wrote, "Fine. If she wants war, we'll make it public." The flyer found its way to my inbox through someone I didn't expect, an old high school friend who now worked at the Chamber of Commerce. Subject line, "Thought you'd want to know." Attached was a PDF with gold trim and the Monroe Foundation crest at the top. Join us for an evening of legacy and celebration as we honor the future of Monroe leadership. Beneath the header, hosted by Valmai Monroe. No mention of me. No Monroe Foundation board title I used to hold. Just Valmai's name, front and center. It was being held at the Foundation's banquet hall. Open invite, public RSVP. I didn't need permission to attend. I didn't even need to justify my presence. I chose a black dress, clean lines, long sleeves, simple. I pulled my hair into a knot, minimal makeup, Just enough to say, I'm here and I am watching. I wasn't there to reclaim a title. I was there to make sure they remembered I still had a name. The room buzzed with champagne clinks and polite small talk. No one expected me, which made my arrival all the more surgical. I didn't announce myself. I didn't smile broadly. I walked to the side, took a seat near the back, and waited. Valmai stood at the podium as if she'd been born behind it. Her hair perfectly curled, voice polished, tone rehearsed. She opened with, "Tonight is about legacy, it's about family, and it's about moving forward." My fingers tightened slightly around the armrest. "And I," she continued, "am honored to be the sole torchbearer of the Monroe legacy." The applause was staggered, awkward. Some clapped instinctively. Others glanced around, unsure. A few heads turned toward the back, toward me. A reporter near me leaned in and whispered, "You're her cousin, right?" I looked him square in the eye. "No, I'm her sister." His eyes widened slightly. "Oh." I didn't move. I didn't speak again. I just pressed record on my phone and captured the rest. Because that wasn't a speech. It was a burial. She wasn't just stepping into a role, she was sealing me out of it. Publicly, with witnesses. When I left the gala that night, I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I went home, washed my face, and waited. 2 days later, I received a manila envelope at my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a notarized copy of the revised Monroe will. My name wasn't there. Instead, in bold, clean font, the will listed Valmai Monroe as sole heir to all Monroe assets, titles, and trusts. Next to the line where my name had once been, someone had drawn a single line through it. Not erased, just crossed out, like a mistake. The date on the document was from 2 years ago, just after that so-called family retreat I hadn't been invited to. There was a clause, due to estrangement and incompatibility with family vision. I sat on the floor for a while, legs crossed, the paper resting on my knees. I remembered that week clearly. I'd texted Mom 3 times. "Is this just a couples-only weekend?" No response. I had assumed they were busy, that maybe it was just a quiet retreat. Now I knew better. That was when they'd done it, when they decided, together, that I no longer fit the family brand. They didn't tell me because it wasn't a conversation, it was a decision, and I had no seat at that table. That night, I logged into an anonymous forum I'd visited once or twice before, a space for estranged adult children. I posted one line. "They wrote me out in ink, but I exist in blood." By morning, there were over 300 replies. "Me too." "Same here." I thought I was the only one. The flood of voices didn't heal anything, but it made the silence less loud. I started researching, quietly, carefully. Wills changed under emotional coercion, legal protections around inheritance fraud, precedents of disinheritance without notification. I kept the will folded on my desk, next to a legal pad where I began drafting questions for an attorney. And then I called Quinn. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said, voice steady. "I think it's time we talk." He didn't hesitate. "Good, because someone just sent us an anonymous tip." Pause. "And it mentions you by name." The forum wasn't on my calendar until Quinn slipped me the invite. "They're doing a town hall at the Civic Center," he said over the phone. "It's about legacy families, community growth, philanthropic structures, all the right buzzwords." I didn't respond immediately. My laptop was open to the Monroe Foundation website, still featuring Valmai's face in every photo, still listing me nowhere. He added, "They have an open slot. I got you in as a last-minute speaker. I called you a financial transparency consultant. It's not untrue." I paused, then said, "I'll be there." That Friday evening, I walked into the Ashland Civic Center with my chin level and a flash drive in my purse. I wore charcoal gray, conservative, precise, not dramatic. Valmai and Vespera were seated 2 rows from the front, side by side. Neither of them saw me come in. That was fine. I wasn't there to make an entrance. I was there to end something. They had rewritten the narrative. I was about to return it, unedited. The host introduced me without ceremony. Please welcome Sarah Monroe, who's here to share insight on estate transparency and legacy alignment. I stepped up. No notes. Just the flash drive and the truth. I started as expected. Facts, data points, polished delivery. Studies show that 22% of disinheritance cases among adult children stem from manipulation rather than merit. 46% of those families continue to uphold the public illusion of harmony despite legal fractures. I clicked to the next slide, then another, then paused. But statistics mean very little if you don't know the face behind the number. I reached for the remote again and hit play. The audio came through crisp and clear. A woman's voice, my mother's. "She's just a shadow," Vespera said. "She was always just the placeholder until Val Mai got her life together." There was no reaction from the stage, but the room changed. You could feel it. Bodies straightened. Breaths caught. I let the silence land, let it stain. Then, calmly, I said, "That voice belongs to my mother, and that shadow was me." A rustle moved across the audience. A few people looked toward Vespera. A woman in the third row brought her hand to her chest. Another whispered to the person beside her. No one applauded. It wasn't that kind of moment. I didn't need validation. I needed witnesses. And then Quinn, seated in the back, raised his phone and tapped the screen once. A second file began to upload to the projector. A shaky video, blurry at first. Then it focused. Val Mai, at a party, glass in hand, makeup perfect, but eyes glassy. She was laughing, half drunk. "I always hated how perfect she made things look," she said to someone off camera. "I had to clean up after her image. She made everyone feel like I was the mess." She took a sip, then added, "At least now no one remembers her." The clip ended there. No commentary. No framing needed. I turned back to the microphone. "They built their empire by erasing me," I said. "I rebuilt myself by exposing the blueprint." And then I walked off the stage. I didn't stay for reactions. I didn't need applause. I stepped down and made my way out through the side door as the moderator mumbled something about taking a brief break. By the time I got home, the video had already made its way to TikTok. I hadn't posted it, but someone had, probably Quinn's editor. It was captioned, #daughter erased. By midnight, it had 250,000 views. I received 4 emails before bed. The first from a woman in Nebraska, "Thank you for saying it out loud." The second from a cousin I hadn't heard from in 3 years. "I had no idea, I'm sorry." The third was from a news outlet. "We'd love an exclusive interview." I typed back, "Only if I control the edit." The fourth email didn't come with a subject, just a number and a name I hadn't expected. It wasn't from Val Mai. It was from the Monroe Foundation Board. "Sarah, we'd like to request a private meeting regarding current public exposure and recent materials shared at the Civic Forum. Are you available next week?" I closed the laptop. "Yes." It was just past 10 a.m. when the message came in. The sender was someone I didn't recognize, a username that looked like a blend of numbers and letters. "Hey, is this your story?" It read. Below it, a link to a TikTok video. I hesitated. Then I clicked. The video opened with a soft piano soundtrack and dramatic black and white filters. At the center of the screen, Val Mai. Perfect lighting. Perfect tears. Title: How I Survived Being the Forgotten Daughter. My body stilled. Her voice, low and trembling, began to narrate a tale of being pushed aside, being made invisible by her own family. "They always celebrated her," she said. "I was just the background." She paused, eyes misting. "I wasn't the perfect one, but I tried to be seen." My jaw clenched. Every word she spoke, every beat, every pause was pulled from my life, from my experience, from the pain I'd lived and she had orchestrated. She didn't just tell a version of my story, she took it. She repeated the shadow line, word for word. "I was the shadow," she said, "always standing next to the one everyone adored." I couldn't breathe for a moment, not from sadness, from the sheer audacity. The comments were endless, supportive, praising. "You're so brave. This resonates so deeply. You're not alone." They didn't know she was speaking lines from a life that wasn't hers, and I wasn't tagged. Of course not. That would have required acknowledgement. I stared at the screen, every muscle tight. She didn't just replace me, I whispered. She plagiarized my pain. I didn't close the app. I let it run. I let her voice echo, a warped version of truth, edited for sympathy. And then I opened Instagram. The unfollows had begun, one by one. A cousin, an aunt, a former family friend. Then another. Some had reposted Valmai's video. So proud of you, brave girl. You're finally telling your truth. My truth. A message came through. From Leah, a cousin I once stayed up late with during summer visits, sharing secrets and frozen grapes under the covers. This is too much drama, Sarah. Maybe just let it go? Let it go. Being erased was one thing, but being labeled the problem for not staying quiet? That was betrayal wrapped in a polite tone. I didn't reply. I documented. I opened my spreadsheet of erasures, added a new column. Support flip. Listed names, dates, screenshots. Because if they could track my removal, I could track their silence. That night, instead of pacing or calling Quinn or crying like I might have once done, I opened a new draft on my laptop, titled it, What It Feels Like When Someone Else Lives Your Story. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. She wore my grief like a borrowed coat, I wrote. Draped it over her shoulders as if she'd earned the weight. I described the feeling of watching someone else cry your tears for an audience, rehearse your heartbreak like a monologue they'd memorized from a script they didn't write. I submitted the piece to a popular mental health blog I followed, one that shared stories of estrangement, emotional gaslighting, stolen identities of the soul. By morning, it was published. By lunchtime, it had over 80,000 reads. The comments started pouring in. This is exactly what happened to me. I thought I was crazy until now. You gave my pain a name. I didn't feel pride. I felt peace. I printed one comment, taped it above my desk. Your words stitched something back together inside me. Later that day, I took a walk through Forest Park. The same trail Dad and I used to hike when I was young. Before all of this. Before the fracture. Back when I still thought I could earn love if I tried hard enough. I brought my notebook. Sat on a bench beneath a moss-covered tree and began to write. 2 lists. First, names of those I'd lost, not just to death, but to decision. Second, things I found within myself because of it. Underneath both, I wrote, I didn't lose a family. I uncovered my strength. The wind picked up slightly, not cold, just present. The world wasn't healed, but it felt mine. As I made my way back to the trailhead, my phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Rita, a woman I hadn't heard from in 5 years. I saw the post. I think I owe you a conversation. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. No words came yet, and then another message appeared, this time from Quinn. They're planning to take your story down. You need to move fast. I met Deirdre at her downtown office on a Tuesday morning that felt like both a calm before and after a storm. She greeted me with a warm handshake and a look I hadn't received in weeks. Focused respect. The kind that says, I know your kind of fire. I've carried it too. Her office was everything you'd expect of a woman who'd carved out a reputation taking on powerful families and winning. Hardwood floors, deep green curtains, and a wall full of thank you notes instead of diplomas. She motioned for me to sit and slid a thick folder across the table. It's ready, she said. The complaint was meticulous. Every screen recording, each tax receipt, transcribed voicemail, and deleted calendar invite, they were all compiled, dated, and notarized. The lawsuit was directed at Vespera, Valmai, and the Monroe Estate Trust, breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent exclusion, intentional emotional distress. You're not just fighting for yourself, Deirdre said, eyes steady. You're setting precedent. We drove together to the Ashland Civil Courthouse. It was familiar in the way cemeteries are, silent, strangely peaceful, cold in places that should feel warm. As we entered the filing center, I exhaled slowly, stepped forward, and signed the complaint. Not in fear, not in defiance, with clarity. No more whispered warnings. No more backroom edits. My name was on the record now, in ink that couldn't be erased. By afternoon, I was back home, sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by 3 cardboard boxes filled with folders and envelopes. I had avoided them for months, but now I needed proof, not just of their deceit, but of my presence, of my investment. Inside the first box, I found a binder labeled Monroe Foundation, 2017 taxes. Tucked in the back pocket were 5 years' worth of payment slips, all bearing my name, property maintenance fees, insurance premiums, quarterly repair fund contributions. They'd said I had no claim, that I was never on the paperwork. But the checks were mine, the automatic transfers from my personal account, documented, reviewed, ignored by them until now. I opened a new folder on my desktop, proof of contribution. Inside, I dropped scanned copies of every document I touched that day, highlighted names, circled payment lines, added notes. They erased my name from the front of the building, I whispered aloud, but I paid for the walls. I sent everything to Deirdre that evening. Her reply came 5 minutes later. This seals it. By morning, the Ashland Tribune ran a small but potent headline. Civil dispute emerges in esteemed Monroe family trust. The article was short, measured, but it quoted parts of the complaint and referred to ongoing questions around transparency and inheritance integrity. The fallout was quiet at first. 3 former colleagues from Monroe Foundation sent private emails. Didn't realize you were still involved, one wrote. Let me know if you ever need anything. Another, more blunt. Some of us always knew something didn't sit right. Glad you're stepping up. I didn't reply. I filed those too. Under support revealed late. Valmy and Vespera's social accounts went dark. No posts, no comments. The lawyer, Richard, declined all requests for comment. Monroe Foundation made no official statement, but the board page quietly changed. One name missing. A new note. Board restructuring in process. And then came the resignation. A foundation board member released a statement citing ethical disagreements with recent internal matters. No names, but everyone knew. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not publicly. Justice doesn't scream. Sometimes, it just waits with open folders. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a national roundtable hosted by a women's advocacy network. Their theme that year was Legacy, Power, and the Women Who Define It. I agreed, but on one condition. I chose my topic. When Bloodline Betrays, Why Legacy Needs Truth. In my slides, I included a quote by Audre Lorde, Your silence will not protect you. Below that, I added my own, Power given is fragile, power claimed is permanent. Deirdre called the morning of my rehearsal. Injunctions been granted, she said. They can't move or liquidate any estate assets until this is resolved. I didn't cheer. I didn't collapse. I just smiled. Brief. Contained. This isn't revenge, I said. This is restoration. That night, just as I was closing my laptop, a text came through, unknown number. You think this makes you a Monroe? Watch what happens next. The envelope was hand-delivered by the building manager, who tapped lightly on my door and said, Some older woman left this for you. Wouldn't give a name. Just said it was personal. I thanked him, closed the door behind me, and turned the envelope over in my hands. It was light, yellowed at the corners, and sealed with tape that looked like it had been there for decades. No return address, no markings. Inside, I found a single sheet of folded paper, crinkled from time, the ink faint but legible. The handwriting was cursive, careful, and unfamiliar. Sarah, it began. I've wanted to write this for years. My breath caught. The signature at the bottom confirmed it. My biological father. A name I only knew because of the amended birth certificate I'd uncovered weeks earlier. A man I'd been told was no one. A name they never spoke. He wrote of regret, of watching from a distance, of being told he had no right to interfere. I was told it was better for you if I stayed gone, he wrote, but I saw you once, when you were maybe 10. You were holding a violin outside your school. You looked determined, like nothing could touch you. I held on to that. And then, the line that hit me like no other. You were never invisible to me, just unreachable. I read the letter twice. Then again, I didn't cry. I didn't shatter. I just felt something land inside me that had been floating for years. A peace finally seated. The next day, I met Aunt Rita at a quiet cafe tucked into a corner street I rarely visited. She was already seated when I arrived, holding a box in her lap like it weighed more than it looked. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. She opened the box slowly, not looking at me. "I didn't know if I should keep these, but I couldn't throw them out." Inside were odds and ends, old Polaroids, loose ribbon from a gift, a paper angel from a long-forgotten Christmas pageant. And then, the card, still in its envelope, addressed to me in careful block letters, postmarked but never stamped. I slid it out gently. The handwriting was the same as the letter, my father's. Inside, a short message. "We weren't brave. You always were. Happy birthday." I looked up. Rita didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't defend her silence. "I know I didn't do enough," she said, "but I didn't want this to stay buried with the rest of them." I nodded once. That was all I could give. But sometimes presence matters more than permission. Later that afternoon, I wandered through a bookstore downtown. Not for anything in particular, just to breathe among pages. I skimmed memoirs, paperbacks about rebuilding, trauma, generational patterns, stories like mine, but not quite mine. Closure isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it's just choosing to stop waiting. I bought a blank journal, first page, what I reclaimed, and I started listing, not what they took, but what remained, my voice, my name, my right to define my story, my refusal to carry shame that was never mine. Peace, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives like breath after a held note. That night, I cleared space on the top shelf of my closet. Placed the letter and birthday card gently into my memory box. Closed the lid. Then I walked to the living room, where a framed photo of the family still hung near the bookshelf. A smiling scene from a decade ago, all of them present. I was in the corner, partly cropped. I didn't hesitate. I took it down. Not with bitterness, not with grief, with clarity. I placed it in a drawer and shut it quietly. In its place, I hung a frame that held only words. "You don't need to be welcomed back to what hurt you in order to walk forward whole." I stood there for a moment, staring at it, letting the meaning anchor. I no longer needed an apology. That was the freedom. My story didn't start in their home, and it wouldn't end in their rejection. Just as I sat back down to close my laptop for the night, a new message lit the screen. From Deirdre. Subject: court date confirmed. They'll have to face you, in person. The courthouse smelled like fresh wax and air-conditioned nerves. As I stepped through the double doors that Monday morning, I felt a strange quiet in my bones, like my body already knew what this day meant. Deirdre walked beside me, her heels ticking softly against the tile floor like a metronome. We didn't speak as we entered the courtroom. We didn't need to. Valmai was already seated, flanked by her attorney and Vespera, who wore her usual expression of performed calm. Richard sat behind them, silent, unreadable. The media benches weren't packed, but they were occupied. A few local reporters tapped their tablets, whispering notes, half watching us with the curiosity of people expecting theater. I didn't offer them a show. I took my seat beside Deirdre and exhaled slowly. The judge entered, adjusted his glasses, and asked if both parties were present. Deirdre gave me a gentle nod. I gave a smaller one back. It was time. The people who once called me unstable, emotional, too intense for legacy work, now waited in stiff silence as my name was read into the official record. They didn't expect me to stand. They assumed I'd crumble. But roots don't shake. When Deirdre stood, the courtroom stilled. She handed the clerk a leather-bound binder, opened to marked tabs. She began by outlining the case: misrepresentation, financial concealment, unlawful exclusion, emotional coercion. She made it sound like what it truly was, a campaign dressed up as inheritance strategy. Then came the evidence. I watched the clerk project each item onto the courtroom screen. My tax filings, showing years of payments made directly to property expenses. The letter from my biological father, not as an emotional weapon, but to establish the hidden nature of my true lineage and what had been denied me. The forensic confirmed audio of Vespera saying I was just a placeholder, legal correspondence where my name had been quietly and deliberately removed without notification. Valmai shifted in her seat, legs crossed and uncrossed. When she attempted to speak out of turn, the judge raised his hand. "Ms. Monroe, you will have your opportunity, but not now." Deirdre finished with one sentence. "My client isn't seeking pity. She's asserting truth." We took our seats. The room didn't move. No coughs, no shuffles, just the weight of silence. After a brief recess, the judge returned. The ruling was concise. The court recognized my financial and legal involvement with the Monroe estate. It reinstated me as a lawful heir. It extended the injunction against any asset transfer by the current board. It concluded, the court finds intentional concealment and unethical manipulation of trust structure. Vespera said nothing. Her lips pressed thin, her jaw set. Valmai stood, not waiting for dismissal, and stormed out before the gavel even fell. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, but I breathed. This was never about money, I thought. This was about name, mine. 3 days later, back at home, my phone buzzed with missed calls. Emails stacked like bricks in my inbox. Interview requests, podcasts, apology messages from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. I ignored all of them. Instead, I opened my new nonprofit's draft website, Unforgotten Daughters, a space for women like me, for people erased from dinner tables, family wills, and Christmas cards, but not from the truth. I uploaded the original court order and printed a copy for my office wall. Below it, I framed one line I'd written in my journal just weeks earlier. "You are who you survive to become." I never returned to the Monroe estate, but I drove past it once. Windows down, hair unpinned, my name still mine. Later, at the grand opening of the Unforgotten Daughters community space, a little girl, maybe 9, hair in braids, freckles, stood by the welcome table. She watched me hang the last framed quote on the wall. "Miss Monroe," she asked, "were you always this strong?" I bent slightly, met her eyes, and smiled. "No," I said, "but I was always worth it."